How are you guys putting them in now? Do you guys use a driver tool like that, or what are you doing right now to put them in?
We got a pipe.
And just tap the pipe down? Okay. So the same principle as what that's going to do. That's a good way to do it.
Yeah, if it fits.
Yeah, just... So you guys probably rigged the pipe so it's the right size, and then just... That's slick.
That's somebody say, why do I need that tool? I got this thing.
Yeah.
I say, well, yeah, you don't need it then, in case you don't have it.
So this just makes it a little easier, and it's the same thing as what he's mentioning on the pipe side. You just, again, make sure that you've got that in the right position. And then use a brass hammer. Brass hammers are good to have around. Won't mushroom parts on you, so you just want to get it as close to flush as you can, and that bushing will actually push it down a little bit for you. So if you want to get it fairly close, and then that way you don't go past the edge. That's the key thing to keep in mind. And then again, you do that down here on the bottom, and we're just going to do the one side. So the next step in that process is putting the bushing in. And for those of you, are you guys sending your stuff out to be reamed right now, or how are you doing it? You're reaming it? Okay. Okay, so you'll relate to this.
I don't like doing them.
Gotcha. I don't blame you.
That, and then when you put that in and you don't get the oil, that one there would probably be a lot better because you don't have an oil groove to line up.
Oh, gotcha. Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. In fact, our bushing. Are you talking one of these steels here? Is that? Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
That's aggravating when you.
It is. You got to get in the right exact spot. Yep. No, you're right. In fact, with those grooves being all through there, you don't have to worry about that. When I first started doing this, one of the guys asked me, he goes, well, how's it going to get grease in there or anything if you don't have the... Yeah, it just goes all through the system. So that's a good point. Basically, this thing here, it's as easy as just taking it, propping it to one side, and then just doing it. You almost do the whole thing by hand. And instead of having to sit there and size it like you're used to doing and wrestling with it, there's none of that involved. Just get it fairly close. Take a pair of pliers, or we make two different versions of this tool. We make a longer version and then a shorter version. The shorter version is the easiest one to use. The reason we made the longer one is some of these spindles have threaded end caps, and that longer one helps you get past the threads a little bit on those. So again, you just get that down as close as you can, and then tap this with the brass hammer and you're good. Now let's say you run into a burr. Again, that's the beauty of this system. You run into a burr, all of a sudden you go, oh shoot. Well, with that other stuff, if I was using a bronze bushing, you'd have to now scrap the whole thing and go get a new kit pretty much, because not hardly anybody sells just a separate bushing. But the beauty of this here, you take that back out, clean it up again, find what's causing the problem, clean it up, and you don't have to buy any more parts. You just reinstall what you got here. So that's another, a lot of people say, well, it's more expensive. Well, you get what you pay for, I guess, and that's really what makes this a nice system, is that it really helps you if you make mistakes or you do whatever. It's a real forgiving product. So basically, once you get through here, tighten it back down again, and then tap this so it's flush, and that's all there is to it as far as getting those bushings and the lip seals in the right position. So the next thing that's a little different about this than anybody else is out there, a standard Kingpin, it looks like this. For those of you who don't know, there's no grooves in there. There's nowhere for the grease to go. So what we do a little differently is for a couple reasons. Number one, we've got to have a different hardness to this pin to match that steel on the bushing, because it's not the same material. So it's got a little bit different hardness to it. But we're the only ones that have a grease groove Kingpin. And that's for a couple reasons. The biggest one is just to keep grease in the high wear points a lot more than what there would be on a regular Kingpin. The other reason is something we talked about earlier. One of the first things that goes in this system is the bearing. And so about 85% of the time, I'd say the bearing, if the bearing gets shot, some of the other stuff's still okay. It's just this piece here. So as this vehicle's steering down the road, by keeping that groove down here that's longer than the other one, you're almost acting like a pump. And that actually keeps that grease in that bearing all the time. And that's really what gives us a lot longer life to it than what's out there. So you can kind of see where that sits. And we put the word top on here so that you know you're putting it in the right way. The other reason we put the word top on here, and you can probably guess this, is that as you read the word top, you drop it down, these draw keys are in the right spot, so you don't have to wrestle with it as much. So one of them is for the installation side, the other one's for getting you some extra life. So we had a mechanic teach us this a while back, and the next step in this process is the shims. And basically, just a good thing to get in the habit of doing is when you take everything apart, take your shim pack that you took apart, set it on the side. When you open up your new package, take your shim pack that you had, match it up to it, and then add 1 5/1000. You know, we went over the years, we've added shims to all the kits because we'll get guys that call our tech line and say, hey, every time I do this Kingpin job, I needed 6 more shims. You know, can you just put more shims in the box? So we've done that a lot over the years, and it seems like half the time, you know, you go to use it and you won't have enough shims and you steal them from the other side, but it's a good starting point. So you take your 1 extra shim and you put a crease in it, and what that does is just keeps your fingers from getting smashed. So you take that crease, put your pin again so you can read the word top here. So you've got that there. And then take your shim pack here like that. And now you can see where now you don't have to stick your fingers in there. And for years I was sticking my fingers in there getting them smashed on a regular basis. So this was a nice little trick. So basically you take that, walk it over, and drop it down, and it's that easy to do. I mean, on this one, we got the pansied version that's all painted nice and got everything cut off, and obviously it's not going to be quite that easy, but it's a heck of a lot easier than sticking your fingers in there. So once you get it to this point, again, making sure that word top is there, the next part of this is now that you've got your shims in position, is putting this bearing in. And we get a lot of questions on what's the right and the wrong way to put this in. The bearing functions either way. The key thing to remember is every bearing has an opening. So what you want to do is look at the bearing, find where that opening is, and then make sure that you face that opening towards the ground so the contaminant, dirt, and grime can't get into it. Make sure you pre-pack the bearing with grease real good at the beginning just so it gets an initial amount of grease in it. And then I always joke around that this is where most of the cussing gets done in the Kingpin job, because if you get to right here, and you know this better than I do, you get it to right here, all of a sudden you go, oh crap, now I got to take this whole thing back apart again, take a shim out, put it all back together again. So that's where what you want it to be is you want it to be what I would call a tap-in fit. So if you have to take a hammer, a regular hammer, and smash it in, you're way too tight. You need to take it off and get one of the shims out of there. If you just slide it all the way in and out, then you're too loose. You need to take it back out and add a shim to it. But you want what I would say a snug fit. And this is something I forgot to mention on the last class, and you'll know this. What's the last step in the Kingpin process? What's the very last thing you do? I've got him on the spot now.
Put the tops on.
Yeah, and grease it.
Right.
Well, when you grease it, what happens is everything tightens up. So what I've run into over the years is guys will say, okay, well, I want this thing to be loose. You know, I want it to be, or I mean real tight at the time we're doing this. So I've seen guys just hammering this thing into place. What they're not realizing is the last step is greasing it. But when you grease it, this whole thing's going to get tighter. So now you've already taken something that's real tight, and now you've got it even tighter. And that's where you get drivers that are trying to drive down the road. They're going, my gosh, what did Joe do in the shop, man? I can hardly steer the wheel now. And that's the reason is that, you know, that in the mechanic's eyes, he was thinking he was doing something right by making this a real tight fit. But actually, if you're going to, I would lean more on the loose side just because that last thing is...
I usually put the bearing in and then shove my shims in there to see.
That's a good way to do it.
And then,
you bet.
I keep that, I jack the bottom of the...
Sure. You bet. With a bottle jack or something? Yeah. That's a good way to do it. What he's...
I fill the play with the shims and
okay.
then I take it apart and put it all back together.
See, that's an awesome way to do it. So that's, I would say that's probably the best way. I don't know for those of you who didn't understand. He's saying he'll keep this jacked up, and then as he's got it jacked up, he's able to take the shims in there and mess around with the size of it so that it all feels right. That's, if you can do it that way, that's probably one of the best ways to do it. But I just mentioned that because I've seen too many guys put this in where it's so tight that they get it to the end and it steers real stiff. So again, line that up so it's fairly close, and then you can read the word top here, and as we get it lined up, you just drop your pin down.